Hello world, hello internet, hello random people interested in congressional committees. You've come to the right place because we're going to talk about congressional committees. And we're going to start off by explaining what sort of different committees we've got. And we've got stacks. We've got standing committees, we've got select committees, we've got joint committees, and we've got conference committees. And these are all part of the general committee system in the United States. The ones that you need to know about for the exams, basically, it's this lot. If you know a little bit about that, it's not going to do you any harm at all. And of course, knowing about joint committees and conference committees is kind of something you should do. But in terms of the workload, in terms of what's happening in Congress and who's dominating Congress, well, what we're looking at there are standing committees. And the role of them differs subtly between the houses, but not particularly. Particularly what we've got here is perhaps a slightly greater role for select committees in the Senate. But generally, and this is important, is that the committees perform the role that in the UK we split out across two different committees. They perform both the legislative and the scrutiny function, and that is very, very important. Also important is this: you need to know about examples. Now, we've already got examples about the legislative committees, or the legislative aspect of committee work. We haven't really looked at this scrutiny yet, but we will do. However, this presentation is all about the structure and the bare bones of it, and what you're going to have to do as you're going through it is put meat on those bones. So use the resources at the end of this presentation, and indeed elsewhere, to try to make sure that you can come up with the evidence that you're going to need to substantiate your argument. And that comes in at this point as well. There is a hierarchy of committees, and that's true in the Senate and indeed of the and of the House. And so you've got common or garden ones at the bottom, and then they work all the way up to things like appropriations and foreign affairs and judicial committee and so on. And those are all explored in great detail in my Storify, which is linked at the end. So don't forget to look at my Storify. And of course that says Storify, can't you read? Now, one freestanding committee that is very, very important in the House is that one. It's the House Rules Committee. This essentially establishes the timetable, and if you haven't got the House Rules Committee on your side, the chances of any legislative proposal making any real distance is basically negligible. Now, there is no House Rules Committee, there is no Senate Rules Committee, so instead, what happens in the Senate is subtly different, as I've mentioned earlier. The Senate likes to think that they're the big boys, and they don't need a House Rules Committee to set up their timetable. Instead, it's done by negotiation, which basically means that nothing ever gets done. But anyway, that's me getting ahead of myself. So you need to know about all these different committees in the House and in the Senate, and that's great. So good, all clear. Yeah, well, we'll move on and see how clear we can make it. So standing committees. These are all of the standing committees. And if I was going to say which ones are at the top, armed services always there or thereabouts. Budget's always quite important. Things like rules, I just mentioned that one earlier, and ways and means. Now that's another very, very important House committee. Over here, finance, foreign relations, very, very important, and the judiciary. I mean, these are particularly important because there are special things there. There's that notion of advice and consent, and obviously that goes first to the committee before it goes to the General House. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, there's a hierarchy here. There are lots. These are the key committees for you to know about. Yes, that's a sort of structural thing. Now, within these committees, we have committee chairs, and the committee chairs are monumentally important. They control the procedural aspects of the committees. That is to say, they manage the day-to-day business. They chair hearings, they decide what comes on, and then they actually control the drafting or the markup of the legislation. They're also in charge of the structure of the committee, so they manage support staff, they establish subcommittee arrangements, and then they're responsible for liaising both with the hierarchy, with the officers of the Senate, party and chamber, with other committees, especially rules in the House of Representatives, and of course the White House. They're also responsible for external liaison, and that puts them in a position of tremendous authority. Now, here are some examples of committee chairmen who were there for a long, long time. Look at that, 79 to 92. And he was chairman of the subcommittee for 43 years. Patrick Leahy, he is chairman of the Justice Committee. What we're seeing here are chairmen committee chairmen who are incredibly powerful. And one of the things that we have seen over recent years is an attempt to rein in the power of these committee chairs, because it was argued essentially they were answerable to nobody. They basically did what they wanted when they wanted, and nobody could control them. The speaker couldn't control them, the minority leader couldn't control them. They were perceived to be entirely baronial, if you will. They created their little fiefdom, and anything that had to get done had to be done through that committee chair. Look at that, 43 years. Any decision on agriculture in the United States, any significant agriculture decision for 43 years had to go through James Whitten. That's incredibly powerful when you think about just how big an issue agriculture is in the United States. And here again, Patrick Leahy, he has been chairman of the Justice Committee for a significant amount of time. All that time, he's been approving appointments to the Supreme Court, as part of obviously the wider scrutiny process. And yeah, he was also on the Agriculture Committee, so yeah, he gets around a bit. More things that committee chairs do. If we look at this, we talk about gatekeeping. They decide which bills are considered. They look at the drafting of a bill, and they manage the scrutiny function as well. So, I mean, what we're seeing here is that chairmen are incredibly powerful. And one of the most important things to grasp about the United States is that this is perceived to be a valid career move. Again, we're looking at someone here who was chairman of that for 43 years. That doesn't happen by accident. You get onto that committee, they're going to take you off that committee in a box if it's important enough. Because even if you're president, you can only possibly be president for 9 years. But here, he was president of the Appropriations Committee for, 13 years. He was chairman of a subcommittee for 43 years. I mean, how powerful is that? This is perceived to be a valid and legitimate career path. And there are people, and you can see a few there, who have simply made an entire career out of running a committee. Think about the UK. How many chairmen of a committee can you name? I mean, even me, I can only come up with a handful. And a lot of those are historical. So, whereas in the UK, being a chairman of a committee might be perceived to be a stepping stone into government as some junior ministerial role, here in the United States, you can get onto a committee and that's it. You're set for life. And you never need to worry about any other role or any other important, significant office. Again, that's it. You're set. You're not moving. So that's a very, very important thing about committee chairs. And it's one of the reasons why they were so keen to undermine that. Because this comes back to the contract with America, which you should remember as Newt Gingrich in about '94. He decided that the baronial model was wrong. He wanted to create a position whereby the parties could actually determine who passed legislation rather than committee chairs. And so he tried to create some sort of party discipline within the United States. And first and foremost was an attempt to deconstruct that baronial model. Before the contract with America, before the Gingrich's reforms, it was the seniority principle that determined who was in charge. In other words, the chairman of the committee would necessarily be the longest standing member of that committee. And remember, we saw there the 43 years on the agricultural subcommittee. And the barons, once in place, would take care of all of the horse trading and the log rolling and the pork barreling. So they were the guys who did the deals that got the legislation through. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, one of Gingrich's roles was to undermine the ability of the chairman to dictate terms, and so they started chipping away at that. It wasn't officially banned until 2010, but certainly it was on the downturn from '94 all the way through. So we've switched that, and post-contract with America, again, this was the Newt Gingrich idea for reforming the House of Representatives. We saw an attempt to switch power from committee chairs to party leaders, and arguably this is one reason why nothing gets done anymore, because whereas these committee chairs had real power, both hard and soft, we should know that party leaders relative to committee chairs are dramatically underpowered. They just don't have any resources. They find it very, very difficult to put people's feet in the fire. And so the switch from committee chairs to party leaders in terms of driving the legislative process it kind of backfired spectacularly, I think is the best way to put it. The seniority principle was kicked out. Now, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea, but what we had instead were elections, and those were to a large extent steered by the party leaders, but you couldn't necessarily guarantee the outcome. but that was relevant. But perhaps more significant is this idea of term limits for Republicans. Republicans were now restricted to 2 terms in charge. So after every 4 years in the House, and then after every 12 years in the Senate, a Republican, if they were still in charge, they would be obliged to sit down. They would be obliged to stand down as leader of that particular committee. What that did was that it prevented them from establishing this baronial model, from digging themselves in by process of patronage and favours. And this high level of turnover undermined the integrity, or it undermined the ability of the committee system to shape the legislative process. Perhaps more significant, however, is the flipping of the chambers. The chairs of all committees have to come from the majority party. And we can see here that there's a long period of democratic hegemony here. 26 years there in the Senate, 40 years in Congress, and in the House. And this was when the baronial model was at its strongest. If you were basically chairman at this point, the chances are you'd still be chairman at this point, because there was no incentive for them to because the House didn't flip, there was no need for the position of committee chair to change. Since then, we've seen a period of relatively high turnover, and so each time the House flips, we get a new chair on the committee, and that has done a great deal to undermine the ability of committee chairmen to dig themselves in and try to recreate that baronial model. Now, I've gone through this really at a very, very superficial level. It's really quite important that you look at these particular resources. This, as ever, with the crash course, is superb. This, I modestly present, is not too bad. I strongly suggest you read it. It fills in a lot of the blanks that I've just glossed over. And again, some of these resources here are really quite helpful. So do please have a look at this particular presentation. I'm going to scroll through it now very, very slowly, and if you want to use that as a way of looking at it, then you're welcome to do so. But do please look at it on the web and make sure that you follow some of the links, because all of this fleshes it out. Oh, not sure what's happened there, so I should probably stop. Thank you, and bye.